So the next question is, what non-theological studies have each of us pursued and why as Dominicans?
Okay. A particular interest for me is social systems and how they function and how they shape people in terms of moral values. And so I pursued graduate studies at the University of Illinois and got a master's in sociology. I was particularly chose that school because they were very much engaged with how corporate America was impacting the poor and the kind of downsizing of labor unions. There were some phenomenal people there. But I also studied with professors, Ethel Schwartz, I think maybe Edith Schwartz. She was really the founder of the Gray Panthers at the time. She was a professor in the university, quite a spellbound teacher, and she was always pushing the students not to think about just interpersonal things, but how these systems and how things like Social Security and Medicare and things like that would change America. And so I was studying that so that I could look at what the Catholic Church's social teachings, that they would be credible in the marketplace, in the public square, because we can reinforce ourselves internally by what we believe and are convinced that is the truth. But when we go into the public square, we don't find that consensus, and so we have to be able to be literate in the language of the public square, of the marketplace, if you don't understand investment dynamics and things of the sort. So we saw this incredible economic crisis, which was not kind of spontaneous, but actually there were actual mechanisms that created the great crisis we had roughly 10 years ago when the stock market crashed, the whole mortgage system. But anybody versed in some economics knew that this thing was fragile. And so to be able to speak the language of the market, to be able to speak the language of politics, is critical to be a critical player in the marketplace. And again, Dominicans from the 13th century they didn't always go to the church and preach. They went to the public square. That's where they preached. And there was the custom of the time. People, you go to Europe today, you'll see there's pulpits, if you will, or little platforms for speakers to get up and say their piece. And they would just draw a crowd and make their argument. And so my life has been engaged in that kind of discussion, in more recent years very, very involved in the immigration question, right on the grassroots level in Miami, dealing with the refugee situation of Haiti and others, and to be able to talk to the public square. And I'll give you one example. In Miami-Dade County, they were denying basic inoculations to people who were undocumented. And I went to the city council and argued that this was not only stupidity, but it was against the common good, because people coming, and we were having outbreaks of meningitis, diseases that you wouldn't often hear about here in Wisconsin, were breaking out in South Florida, and they were denying these inoculations because the people were here without documentations, and it changed the policies there. But I was not alone there. It wasn't the great hero of the day, but I went with other concerned people, doctors in particular, but someone coming from the faith community, that could show that a small investment had a major economic impact on the economy of the county. And so in the long run, to vote for this inoculations was saving the county. And because of my background working with stats and stuff, I was able to throw the numbers out on the table there, and they couldn't refute it, and ultimately change policy. So that's kind of going into the public square. And that's why I studied sociology as I did. Political sociology, it was called at Illinois.
My specialty is interreligious dialogue. In particular, I've been dialoguing with Tibetan Buddhism, but a lot of other religions as well. It was a decision by the Dominicans around the world back in the late 90s that really in the next millennium that's going to be increasingly important, and we're not up to speed with it. But to do that, I've had to not only study other religions, I really needed to study a lot more philosophy, um, just to understand how differently people can see the world. There's fundamental disagreements in various religions about what even a human person is, or does this stuff even actually exist? And what is its level of existence, its level of reality, and what does it mean to even be true? If something is true, what does that mean? There's a huge difference of opinions. So to get sophisticated enough on that level to be able to then more critically and thoughtfully enter other people's worlds, other religious worlds, with a level of sophistication that I can then balance, understand what they're saying, and try and convey what we're saying, and name the differences.
You do it also, don't you have a degree in electronic engineering, which you use a lot with media communication and things of that sort?
Since it's about discussion and communication, and I mean, we're really in the era of communication. So yeah, I designed computers before I joined the Dominicans, and for 8 years I was the internet promoter for the order. So working with various Dominicans around the world who are doing websites and just breaking into that world, letting them not have to just be consumers, but be producers in that world. And what does that mean, and how to get them the skills. So yeah, I'm always riding that wave of internet technologies. And just saw your website this morning. Very good. Very good. A lot of stuff there.
And there is. Well, I study education. And the biggest reason I'm excited about education is that it isn't always what gets said. It isn't always the content that is the most important. A lot of times it's how the content gets delivered that becomes really important. And I think we see a concrete example of that in Pope Francis. In many ways, Pope Francis is not saying a lot of new things, but the way he's saying it is resonating with people because of his lived example and his language, his vocabulary. It's kind of like what Brother Ed says in terms of making it available in the marketplace. That's really critically important. What I'm particularly interested in is how a particular school community, in my case a Catholic school, but it has connections to others, how does culture influence the outcomes a school wants to deliver? And so in particular, in my case, I'm looking at Catholic schools in terms of how they develop a culture that leads to discipleship, somebody that wants to follow Jesus and live the faith and be excited about the faith. But it's also a very important area in terms of the business world, in terms of how a culture impacts how a business conducts itself and what it does and what it values. It's important in public schools, how the school conducts itself. I think the University of Wisconsin is a rather interesting example of that, actually, because of the Wisconsin idea. And that's a culture, that's a certain expectation and belief about what education should be like, to whom should education be available, what does it believe about the role of education in society. And so those things are important. I think it's important as a Dominican because how we engage people in our society, whether it's on a college campus or in a school or in a parish or wherever, becomes important because we have to not only be concerned about what we say, but whether what we're saying is going to make sense, is going to be intelligible, is going to make a difference in people's lives, so that this concept of engagement that was mentioned earlier is really a good thing, because that's really, I think, how we make a difference. I would say that in many respects, when it comes to study, I think Dominicans see study, all study, as valuable, just because it's helping us to make sense of the world in which we live and the way in which we live and how we integrate our faith with the world, with people who don't share our beliefs, with people who are of other faiths, people of no faith. I think that's kind of how we see this question of study as being particularly important as a mechanism to engage ourselves in the world and try to make society a better place, whether it's within a religious context or in the larger context of society and the common good and that type of thing. So,
yeah, and that's interesting about all three of our examples. Certainly I love truth for just truth's sake, but we do our studies so that we can affect the world in a positive way and
Mhm.
engage the world in a positive way. And I think that really is a very Dominican thing. This
Yes.
study has a purpose in reaching out to people.
Mhm.
You know, there's a terminology that develops. We're 800 years old, so we have our own language, if you will, and a term that which usually in the public we don't use so much, but internally, at least of the generation I belong to, uh, is assiduous study. And we were trained that no matter what book you pick up, even if it's going to be a novel for relaxation at the end of the day or in the morning, whenever, or just a day off, that first you open your heart and you pray and ask God, whatever truths I find in this are part of you who are the truth, but also that truth can be shared with the world. So we're always pursuing truths. And often, I mean, I've been a teacher a long time in my life, students who are very much interested in moral issues, I used to tell them, they said, what's the best books to read about moral theology, brother? And I used to say, novels, mystery novels, all kinds of novels. Then a novel will take you into worlds. So I've never been into drugs, for example, recreational or whatever. But in a novel, you can go with people into this dark world and see the moral choices they are making and the influences and the structures that are designing their lives. And so it's just a paperback, but it's a theological work.
Yeah.
I like gardening, and you, as soon as you have plants and you plant them and you have vegetables, you're going to be aware of the reality of the earth and the ecology, and are you going to give it artificial fertilizer, or are you going to go organic, all those things. So there's all kinds of truths and all that, and everything is a subject of study for a Dominican.